Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Judy Harris-Kluger, and I am the Executive Director of Sanctuary for Families. Let me begin by thanking Paul, Chad, and Cutter, the three men who shared their very personal stories of pain in the moving video you just saw. Their stories illustrate a central theme of this evening, that issues of gender violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, sex trafficking are not women's issues, but there are collective issues. Tonight is about a new way of thinking about gender violence. Sanctuary for Families has been in this field for nearly 30 years. We have helped hundreds and thousands of victims and been leaders in systemic change, working closely with organizations in New York City and across the country. But the violence continues. Here in New York City, the police respond to over 700 domestic violence reports every day. Nearly 1/3 of all women murdered in this country are killed by their intimate partner. The sex trafficking industry is destroying the lives of countless women and girls every year, and according to a recent presidential report, sexual assault on college campuses has reached epidemic proportions. We at Sanctuary see daily the devastating effects these crimes have on our clients and their children. So what are the cultural forces that are shaping our attitudes about gender, power, and masculinity? And how are they contributing to this epidemic of gender violence? Why is the question often, why does she stay? Or why did she go back? And not, why did he hit her? What role can every person in this room, men and women, though today we are focusing on men, what role can you play so that you are part of the solution, so that you can become a bystander no more? This is what we will be exploring tonight. It has been our great pleasure to partner with A Call to Men in putting together tonight's discussion. And I want to thank in particular Ted Bunch for his leadership on these issues. Ted and I met many years ago at the beginning of our professional lives, and it is with particular pride that I see him on tonight's stage. Many thanks to our amazing panel, especially Michael Kimmel, who was pinch hitting, who agreed this weekend to replace Casey Gwynn, who is stuck in San Francisco with the flu and so regrets he can't be here tonight. Also to my colleague at Sanctuary, Angela Rivera, who does such wonderful work for us. I am so grateful for Pat Mitchell agreeing to guide this discussion as she so gracefully does. Thanks also to the many men who have taken leadership roles at Sanctuary over the years, including our current board president, Bill Gorin. Special thanks to all of the Sanctuary staff members who are responsible for orchestrating tonight's event, in particular Susan Puter and Jonathan Goodman, and to Lynn Savarese, who took the beautiful photos you see on tonight's program. Finally, I want to thank all of you for being here. We had over 600 people registered for this event, which speaks to the relevance of this topic and its resonance today. I am sorry we couldn't fit everyone into this auditorium, so a special hello and welcome to those of you watching on video monitors in the gallery. Now it is truly my pleasure to introduce to you Zachary Carter. Mr. Carter was recently appointed by Mayor de Blasio as New York City's Corporation Counsel, making him the top legal counsel of the city and head of one of the nation's largest public law firms. Prior to his appointment, Zach was a partner at Dorsey & Whitney, and as United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, he led numerous prosecutions of national significance, including the successful civil rights prosecution of New York City police officers for the torture of Abner Louima. I first met Zach when I was an assistant DA in Brooklyn, and he was one of the top lawyers in the office. He gave me great guidance and advice then, and has continued to do so over the years. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, advisor, and colleague, Zachary Carter.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm particularly grateful to be introduced to my friend and colleague, Judy Kluger. And it's, I believe, Sanctuary for Families' great good fortune that she's now their executive director. And I also extend my thanks to A Call to Men for helping to organize this event. I was particularly pleased to be invited to a forum on domestic violence that has as its theme, Bystanders No More. I began to think about this new approach to thinking about domestic violence as a gateway to changing attitudes and culture around this topic when I was asked a couple of years ago to provide commentary on MSNBC in the Ariel Castro case. Now, many of you will recall that extraordinary case in which a man over a period of many years kidnapped in succession 3 young girls and held them in slavery, in captivity over a number of years, sexually abusing and raping them and brutalizing them and forcing abortions and a condition of living that of unspeakable horror. And you'll recall that there was much speculation about why no one in the community noticed that these young girls were held captive, even though, in fairness to that community in Cleveland, the signs that anyone was being held captive in that house were so faint that Sherlock Holmes might not have discerned that they were there. And I think there was a tendency to focus on the Ariel Castro case as the quintessential exemplar of child sexual abuse. But because I had an opportunity to do research in preparation for my appearances in that case, I had a chance to see that case differently. Because while it was a horrific example of child sexual abuse, it actually had its roots in unaddressed domestic violence. Because long before Ariel Castro kidnapped those 3 girls, he inflicted the same kind of treatment on his wife. He held her in conditions of captivity that were strikingly similar to that in which he held and abused these young girls. There were multiple reports of domestic violence. He was arrested on more than one occasion. His wife suffered broken bones, injuries to her head that were severe. On one notable occasion, he beat his wife in the immediate aftermath of her having undergone brain surgery. And yet no one outside the family reported this ongoing series of abusive acts. And it's not too difficult to speculate about the reasons for that, because we all live in families. Some of us have seen these kinds of situations in which women have suffered abuse. And very often when there are obvious signs of abuse, that unexplained bruise, the limp, the unexplained absences from events where you think that the spouse should be present, what do people say? It's none of my business. It's none of my business. Right? And you have to ask yourself, why do they say that? And I would suggest it's because they don't think through the long-term consequences of domestic violence, which eventually becomes all of our business. You know, there are lots of case studies that demonstrate that where there are instances of domestic violence, that violence spreads across generations, and that the children who witness domestic violence very often go on to replicate that behavior. So you see an episode of domestic violence and you consider it none of your business. Well, when the son of an Ariel Castro wants to date your daughter becomes your business. What I would suggest is that we import into the arena of domestic violence and addressing domestic violence the same strategy that I think has helped keep us safe so far in the area of terrorism. When you see something, say something. I think if we import that, if at the end of this conference, entitled Bystanders No More, if we begin to think that in this arena also it's important that if you see something, say something, that will go a long way toward changing attitude and culture and preventing harm to women. Thank you very much.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Ted Bunch. As I said, I know Ted from many years ago when we embraced, when he came in, he said, I'm like your son. I said, no, you're like my younger brother, not like my son. Ted began his work in this field as a co-creator and senior director of the largest program for domestic violence offenders in the United States. From there, he moved on to A Call to Men, broadening his work to focus on prevention and male accountability. Ted has become a national leader in this field, and really we are honored and thrilled that he's here with us tonight. Ted.
Good evening. Thank you, Honorable Judge Judy Kluger. So nice to see you, and she really did help me, help raise me in this work, and I'm really always grateful to you for that. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the leadership of Sanctuary for Families and the staff, and also William Gorin from Sanctuaries, as well as his representation of on A Call to Men's board. Mr. Carter, thank you for your comments. And Zeta Psi Fraternity from Seton Hall, are you guys in here still, our volunteers? All right, thank you for being here, gentlemen. Those are our next leaders, and it's, you can't get here early enough. And I want to also thank for my beautiful, generous, and kind son for joining me here today, too. Jalen, thank you, Jay. So I have the distinct honor of introducing you all to Pat Mitchell. Pat is an icon in the world of media. She is currently president and CEO of the Paley Center for Media and was the first woman president and CEO of PBS. Pat has worked in front of the camera and behind it, anchoring the news and reporting for broadcast networks and producing award-winning documentaries as president of CNN Productions. She was the first woman to launch, produce, and host her own national syndicated Emmy-winning talk program called Woman to Woman. Her many awards include multiple Emmy Awards, 5 Peabodys, and 2 Academy Award nominations. Pat was named one of Newsweek's 150 women who shake the world. She has received the Sandra Day O'Connor Award for Excellence and was inducted into the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame. But most importantly, Pat is a warm and wonderful, caring individual who is passionate about equality and social change. She's a true visionary and leader. When A Call to Men was born years ago, she was one of those women who understood the importance of men being involved, and there was a lot of hesitation for good reason, that men might come into this work and do what men like to do, which is take over. And she trusted us as an ally and was in solidarity with us, and she and other women like her made all the difference in the world. So I thank you for that, Pat. It is my great honor to welcome Pat Mitchell to the stage, along with our panelists, Byron Hurt, Angelo J. Rivera, Don McPherson, and Dr. Michael Kimmel. Well, can we give it up for Pat Mitchell first, please? And if my wonderful brothers can join me up here, please. Thank you.
I'd like to first begin by acknowledging this extraordinary man and the work that he's been doing for so many years on gender violence. Could you help me thank Ted Dunn? Thank you. Tonight, it's a great privilege to be back with Sanctuary. I've had the opportunity and indeed the honor to do other programs with them, and I always leave programs that are put on and produced by Sanctuary for Families knowing more than I know when I came in the room. And I hope that that will be the case tonight. We want to broaden the conversation beyond the horrific numbers and horrific stories of domestic violence. In fact, broaden it beyond violence against women and talk in more specific terms about gender-based violence. We know the numbers about violence against women. 1 in 3 women on this planet will be a victim of violence in her lifetime, more than 1 billion women. But what's not captured in that number are the stories of boys and men and the attacks of violence on the LGBTQ community. And these men tonight have not been bystanders about any of that violence. They have been, as my friend Jane Fonda said recently, upstanders. So it's, we couldn't find a better group of men actually to help us broaden this conversation a bit, not only to look at men's responsibility and the roles that men must play in order to end violence against women, but also the roles that all of us as citizens of this country and of the world can play in ending all of the forces that are leading to the extraordinary number of people who are being violently abused and attacked in their homes and by people that they love and trust. So tonight we'll begin by asking that question of what's a man's stake in the movement to end violence, and then broaden it more to the subject of gender-based violence and what each of us can do. I get to ask the questions, but you also do. You have cards and pencils that were given as you came in the door. I urge you to write down the questions as they occur to you. Pass them to the left. There will be people standing at this end of the aisle. And after I've had my time of asking and you've had some time to listen to these extraordinary people, we'll also try and take some of your questions. Now let me tell you more about who they are. Michael Kimmel, as you heard earlier, joined us at the last minute, replacing Casey, who is ill. Thank you, Michael. Michael is a distinguished professor of sociology at Stony Brook University, and he founded Santa Cruz Men Against Rape. He established the Center for the Study of Men and Masculinities at Stony Brook. Thank you, Michael. Byron Hurt.
It's okay.
Byron is a filmmaker, produced a film for PBS while I was there, as a matter of fact, part of the Independent Lens series. He's also, of course, had this film shown many other places, including the Sundance Film Festival, a critically acclaimed documentary called Hip Hop, Beyond Beats and Rhymes. Beyond that, Byron is an award-winning writer, an anti-sexist activist. He's also the former host of the Emmy-nominated series, Real Works with Byron Hurt. Thank you, Byron. Don McPherson. Don and I have talked about this subject once before on a panel, and I look forward to hearing your insights again this evening, Don. He's a former All-American quarterback at Syracuse University and a veteran of the NFL, and also the Canadian Football League. In 1995, Don turned his focus to the issue of men's violence against women, and he took over as director of Sport in Society's Mentors in Violence Prevention Program. Don's emerged as a national leader and advocate for the prevention of sexual and domestic violence. Thank you, Don. Angelo Rivera is a member of the team at Sanctuary. He's the National Director of Economic Empowerment Programs, and before that brings a career of workforce development experience. And Ted, we met earlier. When I get the chance to talk to a group of men like yourselves, as I'm doing this evening, I always find myself thinking, what was the moment in which you realized violence was not a woman's issue, violence was in fact your issue? Byron?
Well, I got involved with this work back in 1993 after meeting a man named Jackson Katz. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with Jackson Katz in the audience, but I was Jackson Katz's guinea pig for a new project that he was creating and that he founded at Northeastern University called the Mentors of Violence Prevention Program. And to be very honest with you, I had no idea it was a gender violence prevention program. I thought it was a violence prevention program, two completely different things. When Jackson broke down what the program was designed to do and shared with me his vision that he wanted me to be one of the first guys to travel around the country in various parts of New England talking to male athletes about sexism and violence against women, I thought that I was clearly in the wrong place. But Jackson was very critical for my own growth and my development and making me aware of these issues and helping me to become a lot more clear that violence against women is not just a men's issue. And I just want to just share one really quick story that answers your question, but that it was a really poignant moment in my life where it was clear to me that violence against women affected not just women, but also boys and men. Jackson and I spoke at a Marine Corps base in Hawaii several years ago. And prior to this training that we had for probably about 35 to 40 Marines who were sitting in a room in their military uniforms, I walked into the room, and as I normally tried to do, I tried to scope out which guy was going to give me the hardest time in the room. Like I always try and identify the problem maker in the room, right? And so there were two guys who looked like your real typical hard-charging Marines. One was African-American, the other one was white. And for some reason, I don't know why, but my gut was telling me that these two guys were going to be the ones who were going to be the most resistant. They were going to give me the biggest problem. They were going to be in denial. They were going to deflect. And so I was starting to mentally prepare myself for that. And we went around the room, and each Marine stood up and introduced themselves, and we asked them to give them a brief background about themselves. And the white guy stood up, and he started to talk about how he felt that this was a very important issue that needed to be addressed because he grew up in a home where he witnessed his father physically assault his mother. And as a young boy, he was too young, too small, didn't have the size or the strength or the power to confront his dad. And he broke down and he started crying. And then we went around the room some more, and the African-American guy who I pointed out to be the problem also stood up, and he shared a story about how his stepfather was also physically abusive toward his mother. And he talked about how much he loved his mother, how much he cared about her, how much he wanted her to be safe. And he broke down and he started crying. And, you know, I had said in presentations many times before that this is not an issue that affects boys and men. This is not an issue that affects women. It also affects boys and men. But it wasn't until that moment where it became crystal clear where these two grown men have been traumatized by the experience of watching their mothers, their primary caretakers, the women that they loved and they cared about, being physically assaulted, and they couldn't do anything about it. That was deep and very powerful to me. And it also demonstrated that this was not just an issue that affects one race or one cultural group or one segment of our society, that this was a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural problem and issue that affects men from all races and all cultural backgrounds. So that was the moment when I really realized that this was an issue that we had to address as men, because there are millions of boys and men around the world who have been affected by this in ways that they haven't fully processed, haven't fully understood, haven't dealt with. My own father lost his mother at the age of 8 or 9 years old as a result of his father physically abusing his mother, my grandmother, who I never got an opportunity to meet. So I know that this is a real issue. And the men who I have come into contact over the years have helped me to understand that, and it's the reason why we all do this work.
Thank you, Byron, too, for reminding us that it's not just the victims of the violence itself, it is those who witness the violence who are equally traumatized, often for a lifetime. Michael, what brought you to the work?
Well, I apologize for not being Casey Gwynn, who's awesome, by the way. I've been doing this for a very long time, this sort of work, and I'm going to tell you how I first started. I think that sometimes the work that we end up doing, the thing that really matters the most is that grabs us. It finds you. You don't go looking for it. In my case, I was a graduate student at Berkeley in the mid-1970s. I was a very conventional graduate student. My PhD dissertation is on 17th century French tax policy, which I'm sure you've all read that, so I won't talk about that. But my partner was actually working at the very first shelter in the Bay Area for battered women. And that was her research, but she was also an activist and working there. And we had one car between us, and it had a stick shift, which she did not know how to drive. And that meant, I was a middle-class, Long Island suburban boy, and I have to say I had no clue. But it meant that I had to drive women to the hospital, I had to drive women to the shelter, I had to get kids out of houses, and because she didn't know how to drive a stick shift. And I thought, one day I just said to her, you know, the work that you are doing is so important. The heck with 17th century France, I want to come work at the shelter. It's really important. I mean, I was clueless, and it does something to you. It does something to you when you're driving a car with a woman who you're taking to the hospital, who's had limbs broken and is cut, and she says, well, sometimes I deserve it, but this time I didn't. And that was the moment, I think, to me, that I said, well, I'm in this. So I said to my partner, I'm going to come work at the shelter. And she said, well, no, you can't. In fact, the only reason you even know where it is because I don't know how to drive a stick shift. And I said, well, I just think this work is so important. I really want to do that. And she said, I have an idea, Michael. Why don't you go talk to the men who do it? And I looked at her like this was one of those Mars-Venus moments. Like, what? I don't want to talk to them. They beat women up. They're bad. I want to talk to the women. And she said, now, I don't know if you've had this experience, but somebody says something to you. Now, this is 1975. And she said to me in words that I can hear her inflection today, she said, you have a natural constituency of half the human race. Go talk to them and make them stop. And I said, so that was the moment I felt like it found me. And so the next year I founded Santa Cruz Men Against Rape. And I've been a pro-feminist activist ever since. Even though I'm a university professor, I've always been committed to doing this kind of work.
Never know what's going to happen with a straight shift, right? Shifted an entire worldview, as a matter of fact.
That's right. Oh, nicely said.
Yeah, you're good.
That was good. She's good.
I've got to hold my own up. So, Angelo, you came to Sanctuary, and again through development and that work, but was there a personal moment, or did it evolve from the work that you've been doing for so many years?
Well, I think I've had to, certainly in the last 2 years, really face the fact that my life story and my life trajectory has been profoundly impacted by domestic violence. And I say that having never seen my father touch my mother or a sister. And the irony is, especially listening to Ted McCourtney, he mentioned that we all know a mother and we all know, we all have a sister that we know, and that's part of the reason why we should be in this movement. I had grown up with my father. It was just him and I for the first 7 years of my life. At 11 months old, I ended up, quote unquote, ended up with him. And he was an immigrant from Puerto Rico, didn't speak much English, came late, sold piraguas on the street and stuff, and I had to sort of figure things out on my own. And I always knew I had a sense that I had a family somewhere. I knew I had siblings. I certainly must have had a mother, but didn't know who they were, how many they were, what their names were. And I lived my whole adult life like that. I went to the foster system when I was 7 or 8, and then went to a home for children in Staten Island, and then joined the Air Force and came back to New York in 1995 and went to Columbia and worked in professional development. I got a very strange call from a woman named Nydia in 2004. I was 44, 45 years old, and she claimed to be my oldest sister, and she said I was one of 6 children, and that I had 5 half-brothers and sisters, and that she basically verified what my father had told me, that at 11 months old, that he sort of got me when I was a bolita, basically a little ball, and he always kind of threw that in my face. It was a sense of source of pride for him. And the irony for me was that I had these siblings that, that my mother had to make a decision at 11 months old to leave me with my father because he would be connected to these kids and it wasn't safe. And I always obviously dealt with my abandonment issues, and I sort of, on the one hand, blamed her for why did you leave me with him, because I knew he was a violent man. But I finally realized through Nydia and through reconnecting with this extraordinary family for the last 10 years that my mother made a rational decision to protect those 4 kids at the time from this man. And it wasn't until I got to Sanctuary it was about a year and a half ago when Nydia finally, in terms of our sort of connection and further bonding, told me the level of abuse and how much, what a threat he represented to my mother and what a threat he presented especially to the 3 girls in my family. So all of that basically comes very late in life for me, at the same time that I'm dealing with literally hundreds of clients at Sanctuary, and understanding how much children become the connection to women, and what a very difficult, what a dangerous element that is. And my mother made a fateful and I think rational decision to let me go in order to have her family be safe. And of course, I mean, for this to happen late in life, and of course with the irony of being at Sanctuary, really brings it into sharp relief that men are really impacted by domestic violence in ways that are almost unimaginable, and you just have to, at a certain point, come to terms with it.
And were you safe?
With him, no. I left when I was taken away when I was 7, so I wasn't necessarily safe, no.
So Don, you come to us from the world of sports, and if there is one world in which a lot of fingers are pointed when it comes to violence against women, it often is that world, what men and boys learn in order to be successful at sports. So what happened for you? Big success in sports, big sports hero. How much of that acculturation did you take into the sport, and what changed?
Well, you all have heard Byron talk. And so in 1994, when I retired from football, from the Canadian Football League, I went to Northeastern University through the Center for the Study of Sport and Society, and that's when I met Byron. And he talked about what he learned from Jackson Katz. I learned from being on the road with Byron and Jackson, listening to them talk. But there's some irony in that. It really was an evolutionary process for me. I had come to Northeastern and that work for 2 reasons. One, I had been doing work since I was a student athlete at Syracuse University in the mid-'80s around issues like drunk driving and drug and alcohol abuse prevention and all the things that we were asking athletes to be role models to talk about with young people. And I thought it was a pretty unique and a position. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking with young people, helping them navigate. As I always say, we use prevention language and scare tactics to help influence behavior when we need to talk honestly with young people about how to make good decisions. Something we do very naturally in the classroom or in sports. And so I went there with this notion that I was one of those sort of good guy athletes who had heard the call of being a role model and understanding that what you do impacts young people. The second irony is that I went to Northeastern University in part because the person who created the Center for the Study of Sport and Society is a gentleman named Richard Lapchick, and some of you may be familiar with Rich Lapchick. For those of you who are my age or older in this city, you may remember his dad, Joe Lapchick, who was the original head coach and general manager of the New York Knicks, and in 1950 signed the first African-American player in the NBA named Nat Clifton. And Richard Lapchick, who was just a young boy at the time, watched the impact and the power of racism in sports and that intersection as his father went from being a hero one day to having death threats and bomb threats to picking up the phone at home and hearing, "Nigger lover, you're going to die tonight." And when I got to Northeastern University, I went to work with Richard Lapchick because racism in sports was my issue. I was a black quarterback. I'm still black, no longer a quarterback. And that was my issue. And I'm not entirely going to embarrass you, but Richard's daughter, Emily, is here, who's also doing work now in trafficking. And I give that to you from your dad, because I know he would send that. But that was my issue, was racism in sports. And I wanted to work with this white man who was speaking out about racism in sports from all of his perspective of privilege. And that was so profound to me. And why I say the other irony is that when I went there thinking that that was the issue that I was going to work on, I met Jackson Katz and Byron Hurt, and I recognized almost immediately that not just the abusive men and the men that we've heard about, like Castro and others who are easily identified as monsters, I recognize that the vast majority of men who identified with me because I was a football player remained silent because of that masculinity that allowed those monsters to continue to exist. And so all of that violence, the most horrific cases, but also the cacophony of misogyny and sexism that we hear every single day, especially in around sports, which is why it's very easy to point the finger at sports. Because it is at the core, right? I would ask men, and it was when I came to the realization, was what was the worst insult I heard as a little boy? It was you throw like a girl, or you run like a girl. This was when I was a young little boy, and I would challenge any man in here to think about how young you heard this sexist and misogynistic and homophobic language that taught you that women and girls were less than. And that put you inside this very narrow understanding of masculinity. And so getting there at Northeastern, thinking I was doing work around racism in sports and the work of Dr. Lapchick, I realized that my presence there, and Byron's presence, he didn't tell you that he was also a football player and quarterback at Northeastern University. We represented that kind of masculinity that was celebrated in the culture, but also was at the core of not just the violence that was committed against women, but the collective silence about it. So that for me was a sort of evolutionary process, and it was being around people like Byron and Michael Kimmel and others and Ted and so many other men who've been so outspoken on the issue that makes me realize that there are so many men living silently on this issue because they're sitting behind this narrow form of understanding of masculinity.
And I want to come back to the intersectionality that you mentioned as well between violence against women and violence against men, but also the racial violence, economic violence, I mean, all the other ways in which we are abusing ourselves and each other. And we'll come back to that. But Ted, it comes directly to you now because your work in A Call to Men was really to look at that core, that touchstone of the problem, really, in so many minds, is this definition of masculinity. What does it mean to be a man? And in A Call to Men, you said, let's get out of the man box. How did you get out of the man box?
Well, thank you. Thank you for also tying in the intersectionality piece and all the sharing that these men have done. Well, I was raised by, both of my parents were very active in the civil rights movement. So we had a lot of, it was always a social conscious kind of household. We always talked about what's right, what's wrong, and them being so involved with the civil rights movement, I became somewhat of a historian of it and also watched how they moved within it. And what was clear to me through the civil rights movement was how much sexism was there. That women were pushed to the back and even said, no, you go sit down, type that up, Rosa Parks, right? So while she was an activist long before she sat on that bus, right? Long before. So, having an understanding of sexism had a lot to do with why I grabbed onto the opportunity to be involved with the work, but the path found me similar to Byron. I was not looking for it. I was actually running and developing programs for men in addictions, chronic relapsing men, programming specifically for men. And that work was somewhat known in New York, and I also had a personal training business at the time, and one of my clients worked for Victim Services and asked me to do some cultural diversity training for her staff and some men's training for her staff, and then wound up offering me a job to run this Batterers program 20 years ago. And I was like, sure. And once I was in that program, I started to do work around the country with specifically around batterers intervention programs, how to work with the role of batterers programs, so forth. And I started spending time with a man named Tony Porter, who co-founded A Call to Men with me. And we started to, it was kind of like ironing, sharpening iron, started to have this analysis, and we were spending so much time with these wonderful feminist women, leaders of the women's movement, who again, similar to yourself, had the patience and kindness to understand the mistakes that we would make along the way and the growing pains, but stayed with us. And so as I'm running this Batterers program, and we became, that's when I met Judge Kluger, we became the largest in the country. We had 600 men a week, all court-mandated men here in New York City, 30 classes a week. And it didn't curb domestic violence one bit. And as we're in this room, and if you were to take the men in this room, and I'm glad there's so many men here today, but if you were to take the men in this room and put them in a room, that's what the men in the Batterers program looked like. They didn't have horns, they didn't have a tail, right? They looked like me, they looked like these men, they looked like all of the men there. And they knew how not to be violent when there was a consequence if they were violent. When the police came to the door, you would hear the yelling and the screaming and her saying stop, and the police came to the door when I go on domestic violence calls with the police officers, and we'd knock on the door and it would stop. And he'd come to the door and say, hello officers, may I help you? I said, well, that's anger management right there.
Yeah, that's
right? So it became clear to us that while the overwhelming majority of violence against women is men's violence, no doubt about it, the overwhelming majority of men are not violent, but we're silent about the violence that other men perpetrate, and that's as much of the problem as the violence is. They only can do it because we allow them to. So our call was to really engage men, because we don't think about these things because we have the privilege not to, but we don't think about them because most of us are doing the right things in our lives. So when we look at violence against women as the manifestation of sexism, right, that sexism is at the core of this, right? And that's where heterosexism comes in and adds some more glue to that man box, or duct tape maybe, because it's a bondage, right? And homophobia, all of that's wrapped around this construct of manhood that's harming not only women and children, but also men.
So what's the biggest barrier to changing this? I mean, we know that the definitions of masculine, the definitions of what a woman is supposed to be, what is a man supposed to be, we've seen that change in very visible ways and great examples like yourselves. So what's the biggest barrier to changing it in a way that no man anywhere in the world can say or excuse any violent behavior?
Well, I would ask my colleagues also, but my view is that we really men have to educate other men. We have to start these cultural and social shifts on how we understand and define manhood and masculinity. And that within that, women and girls have to be valued and honored, right? So we really have to kind of deconstruct. There's a lot of wonderful things about manhood, but there's a lot of things that are harmful. That boy who's told not to cry at 6 years old dies at 55 years old or 60 of a heart attack, high blood pressure, or a stroke, because it eats away at us too. So all of those things have to, we really have to deconstruct manhood and provide another alternative. And the wonderful thing about it is, in my view, is that we have to have some investment in it. Right? It's not just about us doing the right thing in our lives, but it's about doing the right thing all the time for all women and children. My daughter graduated UVA about a year ago, and her last year as a senior in Charlottesville, she wanted to live off campus. And Maya said to me, can you bring down a pair of your shoes? I mean, well, why would she want my shoes there, right? To put outside the door, because she wanted the presence of a man there, because she knew intuitively what the statistics say is that it's not safe for her or any other girls. Now, she's never been harmed. Thank God she's been safe. But she still needed that. So what if something happened? I'm in New York. The shoes aren't going to do anything for her, right? So as men, we don't want Byron. How old is your daughter now? 4. When she goes to college, wouldn't it be great that she doesn't need to put shoes outside of her door? So that's what it's about. It's about all of us.
Yeah. And you are all examples of men who have deconstructed masculinity and come up with different definitions. Yes.
Can I just say one thing about what I think one of the biggest barriers is, and I don't usually flag down this early in the panel, but I've been thinking about this because I've been thinking about a lot of the commentary that I hear from a lot of people saying that this country has never been more divided than it is now. And I think one of the biggest barriers to this issue is that patriarchy, because it has driven our laws, it has driven our commerce, it has driven our economy, it's comfortable. And so it's not just that men want to identify with that narrow form of masculinity, but women as well. Because there's economic comfort in it, there's family comfort in it, there's so many places where you just don't want to rock that boat. And now we live in a time when it's not just that we have a black president, but when that young black boy gets shot and the black president says, I was him. Then you have white people who have been very comfortable in a society that was based on white people creating laws and white people creating a perspective on what is normal, to being now challenged, and let me be more specific, white heterosexual men creating laws and what is normal and what is okay, to all of a sudden being challenged, having their sexism challenged, having their racism challenged, having all that challenged in an open forum. You can't avoid it anymore. We have too many media outlets, we have too much Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and too many things that are going to challenge. I see this in the world of sports, where we have coaches now who are calling kids pussy and faggot on the court, and everyone's losing their minds. And you ask any man in here, if they saw that coach, you go, yeah, I had that guy. I've got that guy. We all had that guy. And yet now it's being challenged, and it feels a little bit like a bait and switch. And so that divisiveness that people are feeling now in this country is because the people who have been previously have been voiceless now have a voice, and they have allies. And I think when it comes to this issue in particular, I think you're getting to the core of our families, you're getting to the core of our society, our economy, that has been so largely driven by patriarchy and white male privilege. And I don't want to get to that word privilege because I think it's really the wrong word. But it is the patriarchy that has driven our economy and our laws that is now being challenged on a regular basis. And that's why we feel so divided. But it's also, I think, the biggest barrier to this particular issue, because you're talking about usurping the patriarchy that's at the core of our country.
That was great, Don, and I agree. From my vantage point, and I'm sure that all of the panelists would agree on some level, I think three barriers that really stand out to me based on my experience doing the work are leadership, male leadership, or a lack thereof of male leadership, education and awareness, and stronger social pressure from men toward other men to help to shift the male peer culture, right? That makes violence against women, hyper-masculinity, hyper-violence, homophobia, sexism, socially acceptable, and in ways that absolves male behavior. That is abusive, that's sexist, that's homophobic, right? So again, to use Barack Obama as an example again, although I have deep problems and issues with his foreign policy, but I think that in many ways, I think his modeling of masculinity, I think, is very important and very powerful. One, in his public demonstration of an equal relationship with his wife, who is very intelligent, very smart, very capable in her own right. I think that's really important. I think also him showing and demonstrating his love for his two daughters, his concern about his two daughters publicly. I think his also speaking out publicly against violence against women, along with Vice President Joe Biden, right? They've been very public about this from the time that they both got into office. And I think his leadership around gay rights and his stance against homophobia, I think, have been really powerful in helping to shift the culture. Now, he hasn't done this alone. There are other people who are also doing this. But I think that as the President of the United States and someone who is very visible and someone who has a sort of cool, masculine persona, People respect his masculinity. People don't question his manhood. You know, they see him as like a cool guy. Some do. Obviously, not everybody believes he's a cool guy. Right? But most people don't question his heterosexual masculinity.
No.
So I think that kind of leadership has to be modeled. And so when Barack Obama stands up for gay rights, right? It gives permission for someone like Jay-Z, a rapper who comes out of this deeply homophobic culture in the music industry, to say, I support gay rights too, right? Because men like Barack Obama it gives them the space, gives us the space to be more accepting, to be a little bit more introspective, to not be so insecure about our masculinity, but to become more secure in our masculinity and speak out about things in ways that we haven't traditionally done. I think those are three areas that I would say are barriers that all of us on this panel seek to change.
And agree, Michael, I just want to set it up for just a moment with a response, because wonderful examples, I think most would agree. Why then are the numbers getting worse, not better? Why are the incidents of violence increasing against girls on college campuses?
I think
against
reporting,
women?
reporting is
that's
increasing.
very
I don't,
tricky.
and I don't, obviously, I don't have that crystal ball to tell you exactly what's happening, but I think the work that Byron mentioned in 1993 when Men's and Violence Prevention was created at Northeastern, that was, I don't want to tell you how long, it was 20 years ago,
Over 20
brother.
years, I think, yeah.
I'm just telling you. It looks good on you.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a little gray.
But there was a time that that so much of the violence that occurred was, and you talked about all of the cases of abusers and the restraining orders that were in New York City at the time. Those numbers really haven't changed much. But what has changed is reporting. That's right. And there's more reporting, there's more activism. I was on 3 college campuses in the past, over this weekend, and I have young men coming up to me saying, we're in men's groups. We're doing this work on campus. There's more activism. There's more, and the more that people are speaking out publicly, the more that people who are dealing with it are going to come out and speak out.
Yeah, Michael.
What about pushback? Okay, I'm sorry, man.
Well, no, I just want to say, as a researcher on this, I think that Don is entirely right, that in many ways what we're looking at is that what used to be is an increase in reporting, so that if it used to be the case that 95% of cases were not reported, now only 90% of cases are not reported. And that's what is actually driving what looks like an increase in numbers. It's really an increase in reporting. And why? Because women now come forward and they say, wow, what happened to me was wrong. If I say something, I'm likely to be believed. I think I'll say something. It's likely to get adjudicated, and I could do well. And then, of course, and it could actually change things. And of course, now what's happening on so many college campuses, you probably know some of the most elite campuses in our country, women are saying, we did everything right, and the college abandoned us at that very moment. So these women are feeling far more empowered to come forward to recognizing it's wrong. So that's part of it. I have 2 barriers that I think are important to add to this conversation, because I think it makes a little bit more complicated what we're talking about. The first one has to do with who we're talking about. I think that the analysis, when I work with men, the analysis that looks at men and women often fails to resonate for a lot of guys, because when we say things like, when we talk about patriarchy, we talk about men's power over women. When you talk about that with men, they say, I don't know what you're talking about. I have no power. My wife bosses me around, my kids boss me around, my boss bosses me around. I'm powerless. Well, I think this is very important, because when men speak as men, they think they're speaking with a voice of powerlessness. So you have all these groups out there of men who are organizing and say, you know how you feel powerless? You're right. Let's go get the power back from those feminists. Yep. Or you have guys going, yes, you feel powerless? Let's go to the woods, we'll chant, we'll drum, we'll do the power rituals. Because that is, or you're going to wear power ties as if power was like a fashion accessory. So I think this question, men don't feel powerful. So an analysis that comes to them and says, this is about your power, will fail to resonate unless, and this is so I have 2 barriers and 2 ways of talking about it. The unless is we don't talk to them as men, but we talk to them as the guy in the very beginning of your films, of the film set. We talk to them as sons, as brothers, as husbands, as fathers, as cousins, as partners. Because then we make that personal. And that's what happened at every one of our events as guys came up, like you with the Marines, and they said, this is my story. So when you talk to them, not as men, this large, absolutely unaggregated category, it means nothing. When you talk to them concretely about their relationships. The second thing is, I got to say, I was really listening to what you said, Don, and I feel, I did this study a few years ago called Guyland, and I interviewed 400 young men on college campuses all over the country about what guys do to prove their masculinity, and how early it starts. And the thing that I think most of us know full well is how relentlessly, as starting very, very young, how relentlessly our masculinity is policed by other guys. How we are constantly, and I remember in my middle school, it was running up behind a guy in the playground and screaming, "Look at your fingernails." You guys know what I'm talking about? You look at them like this and it's okay, look at them like this and you get beat up. And every one of us, we are policed relentlessly. How we walk, how we talk, how we move, everything. And so you ask yourselves, why don't they come forward? The answer is because what you get, and this is the one thing I heard when I was doing the work for Guyland, on every single campus, the #1 phrase among young men is 3 simple words. It's the compensation. It's what they get for putting up with all this policing and abuse. And those 3 words are bros before hoes. And every guy knows this, and they say it to themselves, and they say, this is the compensation, this is the payoff for putting up with all this abuse. And what bros before hoes means is, #1, solidarity.
Respect.
The bonds between men are the most permanent bonds that you will ever have in your life. Every fraternity I've ever worked with quotes one line from Shakespeare, the only line they know, "He who sheds his blood with me will be my brother." That's the only line they know. And number two, what you get bros before hoes. This bond is the most important. And secondly, you get hierarchy. Girls can't do what we do. So you get that hierarchy and solidarity at the same moment. And so breaking that bro code, breaking the silence, that is what that bro code is about. When you never betray the brotherhood. What happens in Guyland stays in Guyland. So my feeling is that is our task. That's what the organizations that we work with, working with men on campuses, that's what all of these organizations are doing, is trying to get guys to move from saying, from that silence that is based on that comfort of being part of the brotherhood, out of that to do exactly as Byron said, the next step, which is we have to learn to challenge each other. If we're going to do that, we also have to learn how to support each other. And those are the 2 things. We've been asking women to do this for us for way too long. This is our job. Yeah. We've got to support each other, and we've got to challenge each other.
Well, we got to change that definition of brotherhood, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
I mean, and now we got to worry about Shakespeare and hip-hop music. So, Angelo, you want to get in here? Is this sounds like what you're observing?
I think one of the barriers is that it has to be seen as a movement that's at a threshold, and it has to be now universalized. If in the time of John Donne, no man was an island, definitely it's not an island now, and that was, 400 years ago. So I think epochally, in an epochal sense, we're at a different stage, and we have to recognize that in terms of we can. It's important to reduce it and to be reductionist about how we deal with it, but I think it has to cross this threshold, and it has to become a broader movement. In his infinite genius, when bus segregation was ruled unconstitutional, Martin Luther King walked up to the podium in his stride and said that this isn't about 50,000 Negroes in Montgomery, don't make it that small. This is about justice, and this is about goodwill. And in that sense, that was part of his genius, that he universalized a particular problem that a particular people faced at a particular point in time in a particular country and made it universal, and that became the Big Bang for the modern human rights movement. I think the movement needs to move in that direction. No one has the right to abuse. No one has the right to put their hand on another person. And I think if we not only talk about it in that sense, but also portray it in the media as that sense, to broaden it as a profound universal right to be free from abuse from a man or anyone else, I think we'd be moving in the right direction. And I think we see it in terms of the evolution of our country. I think Obama clearly has a different take on nationalism. I think when Michelle said, "I'm finally proud to be an American," I mean, she was taken, you know, think about what she went through, but she was right. We had crossed the threshold, now we should be proud. This is what it looks like. So it makes sense to me that the movement should be moving forward because demographically we're changing. I think our values, the pattern of values in this country are changing, and all of that should come together in terms of dealing with what is obviously the most universal of problems. If a third of women are abused or assaulted, and one out of every other person on the planet is a woman, then we've got a serious human rights issue.
Yeah. But part of what hasn't changed, and it seems absolutely essential that it must, if we're going to create a different concept of brotherhood and a different definition of power. I mean, let's start there. And part of what forms that for all of us, man and woman, is the media. Everything from what, you know, we're seeing what men do and act and look like on television and certainly now in social media, hip-hop music, one of the places. I want to come back to that, Byron, to hear your insights that were in your film. But so how big a problem is it in your minds, collectively, individually, the media? How big a problem is it, the way that we're defining what a man is and what a woman is by what we see and hear?
It's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, my opinion is that popular culture, corporate media, the images that boys and men are exposed to, and even girls and women are exposed to about what it means to be manly, what it means to be masculine, the association with manhood and violence, I think are pervasive and they're everywhere. It's like the air that we breathe. It's like we wake up in the morning and turn on the television and we're exposed to all these hyper-violent images of men of all racial backgrounds, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are very few spaces where we as boys and men, and of course girls and women too, can go without seeing these really sort of over-the-top, exaggerated examples of what real manhood looks like.
And hypersexuality
and
in women
hypersexuality, too. And hypersexuality in women, which, you know, they sort of correspond with each other. They kind of go hand in hand in terms of the whole power dynamic is concerned. So, I mean, I'm a member of the media, so I feel as a documentary filmmaker, part of my job is to help deconstruct those images and those representations using the skill set that I have as a filmmaker to help redefine masculinity for so many young boys and men who haven't really had anyone prod them or challenge them in that way. Mm-hmm. So I think media is a huge, huge part of the problem, and I can't stand it. But I think that we have to, I think, you know, media literacy around masculinity is critically important. I mean, we have to be, if we can't beat these huge multinational corporations in terms of the images that they are disseminating globally, then we have to be able to teach young boys and men how to break them down, how to deconstruct them, how to make sense of them, how to process it, you know, and how to actually turn those images and those representations on their head so that the insanity of it, the ridiculously of it becomes crystal clear. Because once it becomes clear to you, you can't see it any other way anymore. Once you have somebody say, this image of masculinity that you are aspiring to does not work in your own self-interest. It really does not benefit you, right? And you start to break down the various ways that it does not benefit you. Mm-hmm. High rates of depression, alcohol, you know, self-medicating, physical violence that may lead you to prison or jail or into a cemetery, you know, violence against women, feeling isolated, all these different things. Once you begin to show guys how this hyper-masculine persona does not benefit you in the long run in terms of your health and wellness, then you start to get guys to think, okay, wait a minute, I'm checking out. I'm divesting in this whole patriarchy thing.
And while you're saying that, Hollywood's spending millions of dollars making sure that the other image is still out there all the time.
That's true. That's true, and it's a battle. It's a battle.
Byron won't tell you this, but there's a moment in hip hop beyond beats and rhymes that is just so telling about how this works. You know, just what I'm going to talk about. He's talking to a bunch of guys who are trying to make it. They're at a hip hop convention, and they're outside the doors, so they're not actually in, but they're trying to make it. They all have their CDs for their samples, and they want to get a producer. And every one of them just like outdoes the other for how thuggy he can be, just how badass and gangsta and sexually sexually predatory, everything. And so Byron just says, you really believe that stuff? He just sort of asks them these. He's a master at like asking what seems to be an utterly innocent, naive question, and they start saying, "Oh no, we don't believe." This guy says, he's like walking around popping everybody, and he says, "I sold water on the beach last week." He says, "We don't want to say this, but this is what the producers insist on. They won't take what we really feel. They have this image of who we're supposed to be." I'm sure I'm bouldering this terribly. But
no, you're doing okay.
It's an amazing moment because that, in a way, it's exactly the moment when you create a moment of openness. Now, I bet those guys walked away saying, why are we doing this? Because the producers demand it of us, and the corporate media that Byron talks about, the record executives are the ones who say this is what we want from inner city African American boys. We don't want we like women. We don't want that. We want gangsta, and that overdetermines what you can do.
Until media consumers stop buying it. Ted?
Yeah. Well, I really think, I would like to believe that those decision makers in the media who are putting out these images that are causing so much harm, the images around this hypermasculinity, the images around not valuing women and girls, that if they were educated, I would like to believe that they would make changes in the same way that we've been educated and we've made changes. I would like to believe that, and I believe that we can do that. It's about recruiting people who they'll listen to, right? In the same way that, I can go and talk to football players, but if Don McPherson, as a Heisman Trophy runner-up and one of the first players in the NFL, black quarterbacks in the NFL goes and talk, they listen to them a little differently. So I would like to think that would happen, that it's really an invitation to men, not an indictment of manhood or an indictment of what they're doing, but an invitation to, you've been misinformed too. And we want to provide this information, and I think that if we do that with men, that they're going to, because they have daughters also. They have women in their lives who they care about. And I would like to think that they'd be able to make those changes. This is about recruiting the right people, the right spokespersons for these things. So,
have you done a call to men among the producers who are making those movies and creating the music?
Well, we've
gangster.
We've done quite a bit with the NFL, and actually the NFL has done a lot of work in this area. They really have, more than the other two top sports. They really have. Now, when that NFL player, like we've had two in the last couple of weeks, Darren Sharper and Ray Rice, who one was sexual. Darren Sharper was a sexual assault. Two of them. Multiple. And Ray Rice with beating up his fiance. Now, I'm not defending the NFL, but I'm saying there's 1,500 men on these teams. We take 1,500 men off the street in New York City, you're going to have at least that also. So it's not just about the NFL, but we've made some strides there, and it's really about having conversations with those decision makers and then bringing that message in a way that they can hear it as an invitation.
And I just want to take a sort of another tack on the media piece, because as my indoctrination into this work was that we as men have to engage and address men so that men are not the perpetrators. In other words, we can't say this is a women's issue, we have to make this a men's issue, we have to eliminate the need for women taking self-defense courses, and women need to do all those things to protect themselves from us. But what's really been difficult for me in the last few years is I have two daughters, and they're 8 and the other one will be 10 in just a few weeks. When they were born, I really didn't want a boy because I knew the challenge that I had. For the first one, I wanted a girl. Because I knew that it was easier, there was a quote up earlier from Gloria Steinem, I knew that it was easier to teach my daughter to be a warrior than to teach my son to be loving and caring, and nurturing and empathetic, and that the culture was not going to beat him up for that. And so I knew that that was easier. That was a selfish piece on my part, and that I could raise an empowered, strong, healthy young woman who could do everything. And I really, and then when my second daughter was born, I kind of wanted a boy. Just because I wanted the experiment. I was ready. Like, you remember Bill Cosby said when his daughter was born, he told the doctor, he says, just blow through her nose and her mouth, and maybe it comes back out. I thought about Bill when my second one was done. She wants a girl. And I'm gonna move over in a minute. But what has happened over the last several years is I always believe, and I have people who say so many really profound and ugly things, like you're gonna have to protect that daughter. I'm like, are you objectifying my 6-year-old? Mm-hmm. Because you're saying that I'm gonna have to protect her because she's attracted to you, 30-year-old man and woman? And what media does is, there was a time when my daughter was humming that song, that Rihanna, Eminem song, "You just gonna stand there and what," right? And she was at the time 6, and she was going upstairs and I heard her humming it. And it was easy for me to sit down and talk to her about what that song was about and what the video was about. It was about a guy telling this woman, a woman saying, "You're just gonna stand there and watch me burn. You're gonna keep hurting me. That's all right, I like the way it hurts." And the guy ultimately killing her, saying, "You made me do this." Easy conversation for me to have with my 6-year-old. What's not so easy is when I'm watching Despicable Me 2. And the narrative in Despicable Me 2, if you haven't seen it, it's a Disney film. It's supposed to be innocent. It's for children. My 8 and 10-year-old daughters love Despicable Me, the Minions, all that kind of stuff. But there's a narrative in that film where the guy, Grio, is single. And the women are trying to fix him up and set him up. And there's this narrative that you're supposed to be in a relationship that looks a certain way. There's a narrative that women are supposed to look a certain way because the woman that they were trying to fix him up with was not desirable to him. And so what was the message to all the 3 young daughters? Well, she's not the desirable type. She's less than the other type. And there's this constant script that is not just in hip-hop, and it's very easy to identify as being misogynistic and sexist and violent, but there's also this other script that kids are learning at a very, very early age, that this is what a relationship looks like. And it's a patriarchal relationship, and it's a relationship where the guy is, I am the victim. Watch any of those shows that are geared towards 8 to 10, 9, 12-year-old kids. The father is always the victim. He's the idiot who can't learn, I can't get my shoes on, my wife's got shoes. It goes back to your point about, it goes back to your point about he's the powerless guy, and the woman is this tyrant in the family. And so there's this script that is even more insidious with media that gets to a very, very early age that's saying that this is what a relationship looks like, and then you have young girls who are seeking that type of relationship, and guys who have not learned how to be in a whole loving, egalitarian relationship.
Right. The messages are everywhere, they're insidious, they're ubiquitous, but we can't just be passive about this and say, well, the media, that's what it does. Right. Those are the messages it sends us, right? And because if we do, we're going to be here 20 years from now having the same conversation.
I have my daughter saying, well, romance didn't need to be in that. And that's about the point that I can get to. And not being, and saying something and saying nothing makes them believe that it belonged in that film.
So let me just say, I don't think we have to be here 20 years from now in the same place because of this. It's important to hold the media to task. But Bros Before Hoes was not flashed on Times Square and some brother saw it and then decided to say it. There's nothing more hyper-masculating than sending people to jail, especially men and boys. There was an article a few years ago that I'll never forget, New York Times, in Brownsville, in a 4-block area, 50,000 young brothers were stopped and frisked within 4 years, 50,000 in Brownsville in 4 years. If Syria did that, if Israel did that, if you know, South Africa did that, we would be up in arms in terms of what a human rights violation that represented. So we have this pipeline system to jail, and what happens to a man, I've never been to jail. I'm a little guy, so that's the last place I want to be. But what happens to men in jail exacerbates this process to a degree that's probably unimaginable. And we send them there precisely because they're of color. In many respects, we know that statistically. And then they come out, and then we wonder why they take out this stuff on each other in terms of being violent within communities, but especially take this out on women. So I think we don't have to be here 20 years from now, but policy in terms of what we do with the prison industrial complex and what happens to men and boys in terms of the prison system. If we can look at that from a policy perspective, then the media doesn't have to reflect what they're coming out as.
And you have brought us back to this question of intersectionality. I mean, you can't separate out racial justice, economic justice, all of these issues. But how do we start to connect them in the minds of people so they see that everything, all of these injustices are connected and that they are leading to violence, violence against women, violence within communities, violence among countries? What do we do?
Well, we speak to it, we name it. You know, we have accountable language that speaks to this. And it really is not just around what we can push out to the media as far as, I don't know, public service announcements, those types of things, but what we need to really look at how we can shift the culture, even using the culture, right? How we can shift the culture. I think that's the best way to impact culture is by using culture. So if we can, not only policy, right? Not only policy, because you're right, that it trickles down. You know, we're telling our kids to pull up their pants, kids who have never been to jail, but that's all from the jail culture, right? Sure. Because they didn't have belts, they couldn't wear their pants up, so they sagged. So it's really about impacting culture with culture. So it's, you know, I think not only around looking at policy, doing it from that way and from the bottom up, but also the top down, and those decision makers, really getting community influencers, those who are in our communities, whatever that community is, might be corporate America, might be media, might be education, criminal justice, and really naming it, having these conversations, and looking at the intersectionality.
Michael?
Well, I was going to say, I'm now listing this sort of media thing as one of the barriers, and I'm thinking that the thing I want us to recognize is that the things that make us feel passive, that we can't do anything. And I hear from parents very often, well, you know, first of all, you know, when I lecture on college campuses, it starts earlier than this. You have to get them earlier. Okay, so you go to high schools. Okay, I'll work at high schools. Oh, you have to get them earlier. And I think these are all ways, and then people say, oh, it's the media. It's like this complete monolith. It's an avalanche. It's completely, you know, it's monovocal. Mm-hmm. I think those are ways for us to feel passive and not feel like we can do anything. I think that as a parent, I have to say, you know, fortunately my son's 15, so I've missed some of the, you know, Despicable Me, but I did watch Toy Story 44 times. But I would say this is our job as parents. As parents, you know, very often we use media as kind of like free babysitting. Mm-hmm. But we can sit with our kids, as Byron was saying, we can sit with our children while they watch the same movie over and over and over again and watch them understand what narrative is and watch them understand how they come to understand how a story unfolds and develop with them and help them develop a kind of critical interaction with those images. Mm-hmm. So that's our job, right? That's not simply, you know, the media is so awful. The same thing happens, I think, with how young we get them. The biggest barrier that I found when I tried to do work on bystanders specifically with guys on college campuses is what I call the individual opt-out option, which is I never did this, therefore this has nothing to do with me. Right. And so that is also a barrier. That sets the bar awfully low for being a good guy. You know, like, all right, didn't rape anybody, check, great guy. So I think, but this is a barrier. Again, this is a moment, these are, for me as a professor, these are teachable moments. These are the moments when we should be intervening, not saying, oh, you're right, the media is just so overwhelming, or yes, you're such a great guy because you never raped anybody.
Right.
So these are moments that this is our job, and this is what we were saying before, that learning how to challenge other guys at those moments, I think, are the critical moments. I don't think we have to sit here, in 20 years and bemoan the same sort of monolithic media. I think that there are ways in which we can engage, when we can find those alternatives, we can find the seams in what feels like an absolutely impenetrable edifice. We can find the seams and cracks in that, and we should be using them and widening them.
And there's still an off button and a delete button, too. I think we have questions, and I'm just looking for where they might be.
Have questions? No other time to write them out and pass them?
No one's passed so far. That's because they've been so interesting. But you might want to do that, to write a question down and pass it over to the left, because we have time for your questions. So I have to ask about one other kind of media, because I don't know how we can have a conversation without violence, without referring to the impact of pornography. There was recently a worldwide study that indicated that, was it 4 out of 6 boys are learning everything they know about sex and about women from pornography.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how do we fight this?
This is terrifying.
Yeah.
Because, again, they're not seeing images of women being respected or valued. They're seeing images of women being degraded and violence toward them. So it's really a huge issue, and the issue of pornography, when we look at the socialization of men and how we pass that socialization down to our boys, and all of us, whether we're those men who are violent and those men who are not, have been socialized from this construct of manhood that says women have less value than men, that women are the property of men, and that women are objects for men. Those 3 things, all of us have been socialized in that way. Not that all of us act out on those things, but that's the teaching, that women have less value, women are property, and women are objects. And with commercial sexual exploitation and pornography, that's really where those 3 things meet at once. And it's terrifying. And I do a lot of work on college campuses also. And by the time they're in college, they've already spent high school looking at pornography.
Sure.
I don't know if you have any statistics on those things, Michael, but
it's really interesting. When I did this book, Torsten will remember this. I did this book in 1990 called Men Confront Pornography, in which I basically said, okay, feminist women have been having this big debate about pornography, and we men have been basically saying, you go ahead and talk about that, but don't look under the bed, kind of thing. I feel like, okay, guys, we have to start talking about this. And so that book came out in 1990. When I was talking to men at that time, they would say that they used pornography, and they would be somewhat bashful, a little guilty, like, oh yeah, sometimes. And it really kind of. Now I go into on college campuses. You walk into a dorm, it's people's screensavers. I mean, the level of ubiquity has just skyrocketed, and it is so easily accessed. 3 clicks on your cell phone, and who knows? You could be watching it right now. But my point is that again, I mean, and we have some interesting debates about it, because other groups have said, well, if this is sexual representation, we can do it too, and there's other kinds of pornography made by those who had been formerly marginalized. But the last thing I want to say is, it seems to me that the question of pornography for most guys, the data that you're looking at, most young men still in the United States today have used pornography as their first form of sex education. Yep. Ted is quite right to say when they learn that this is what sex looks like, they're also learning what sexism looks like. I get that. Mm-hmm. But that is on us politically, that we have in our culture virtually no good sex education for young people that says, this is what sex looks like. This is what good sex looks like. Right? I mean, if your whole sex education is abstinence-based, like that is to say, what you learn about sex is you don't talk about it, then that's what you, and then with 3 clicks, you're now watching people having sex. Yeah. Yeah. Then that's sex education. That's on us. That is a political problem. That's not just about what they're learning in the content. That's a political issue. Sorry.
Right. Okay, I'll go. So, when we talk to our daughters, As soon as before they menstruate, we're having this conversation about sex, right? Our boys, we don't have, all we say is wear a condom. That's it. That's it. As if those boys are not going to have sex with those girls who we're saying save it for marriage. There's so much of a contradiction there. It's so off base. And you're absolutely right, Michael, that how much time do we spend with our boys, even teaching them about kindness and love and sharing and asking questions and what consent is and pleasure. Thank you. Go ahead, man. I'm sorry.
No, did you want to jump into this?
Well, I'm feeling both completely inspired by this conversation, but now I'm also feeling a little overwhelmed by the conversation because I'm realizing that, you know, we have so far to go, even though we have made a tremendous amount of, we've made some strides. But this is going to require all hands on deck. I mean, you know, we're five, you know, guys up here. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Works with a different side of the brain.
Yeah. But you know, we obviously need as many men as possible to combat this, to work against this. You know, and it's going to require a movement, and that's why, you know, what Ted and Tony have done, and what Jackson and Michael and Don and all of the men who are out here, Angelo, who are doing this work, you know, I think it's critically important that we continue to replenish, you know, the pool of men, you know, who are doing this work, who are engaged in this work. So I just strongly encourage all of the men who are in this room to please walk out of this room not feeling completely overwhelmed, but feeling inspired and feeling motivated and feeling like your voice matters, that you can use your male, you know, your maleness in a way that is positive and constructive and important, and ally and support and be allies with women and work with men to reduce all of these issues, because your voice is so much better.
So terrific. As a matter of fact, just looking through it, the first 10 questions are all about, yeah, we're going to have to move quickly, so we just have to do one of you on each of the answers. But these all are about how do I get engaged? Do I volunteer? One very specific question, though, I just get your answer to. A young man who works in a Brooklyn middle school says there's an unofficial touch a butt a day, where the boys are told to try and touch as many girls' butts as they can. So what do you say to that young man to get him to discontinue the practice? Another says, my guy friend's hitting on a person I know, trying to, you know, move away from it. How do I confront him? These are all very specific situational advice questions. What do you say?
Stop. It's unacceptable.
Right.
Okay?
Simple. It is kind of simple.
You know, how would you feel if someone was treating your sister that way?
That's right.
And I just want to say something about, I just said it's simple. I know that's not a fair answer to folks who might be asking those questions, but the response is simple. What's not so simple is the response every single day.
Right, that's right.
It's easy to say it one time, but once you continue to be that person, you have to continue to be that person. And then a number of things happen. One, you get identified as that person, and from there you can form allies to reinforce that response. And the second thing is that person knows that you're sincere about you saying that, and it's not just lip service.
Okay, because that's a follow-up question. That if you see something and you know something's going on, do you say something? Do you call the police? Do you try and remove the person? What do I do in this situation?
I think it's a case-by-case situation. I think that one of the things that gender violence prevention education and bystander intervention prevention does is that it enables you to draw on a lot of different ways that you can handle a situation, right? Giving you different options. And so I think that we have to encourage this idea that doing nothing is the wrong thing to do, right? But that you can do something. So in some situations, it may be the best thing to do to go to a teacher or go to a guidance counselor or go to a coach. In another situation, it may be the best thing to confront your teammate immediately. It may be a good thing in another situation to talk to your friend, your male friend, in a time where his ego is not going to be bruised, right? So I think that you have to learn how to navigate each situation differently based on the circumstance of the situation. And that can only happen when you when you train guys how to respond. Right. Because in absence of that training, guys always think that the only thing that they can do is to do nothing at all. And so that's what we have to work against, in my opinion. We have to work against that instinct that, you know, I can't say anything because this is not my issue, this is not my problem, or because the guy is going to turn on me.
Work against
being a bystander. Or you're going to be that guy, the guy who says it.
Right.
Everybody rolls their eyes when you speak.
Right.
Right.
But this is like we were talking about media literacy. We need to work, with enormous amount of energy on violence literacy, on how to do exactly this. We need to be training people in middle schools. I do a lot of work in school system. Several of us do, and what I try to do is I try to create a conversation. I'm only there for a short time. Workshops, work over the year or something like that. But I try to create a conversation. I ask guys what they think of when they think, like, I'm a good man. Like, what does that mean to you when you look in the mirror and you say, I'm a good man? And usually you'll get something that you might call, like, Homeric or Shakespearean or Judeo-Christian, integrity, honor, responsibility, being a provider, all those sort of nice, sort of timeless essences. And then I ask them what it means to be a man. Like, be a man. What does it mean to man up? All the definitions of masculinity. Now, if you can create a conversation between the ideals that we hold in our head of who we want to be when it is said of us that we are a good man versus what's asked of us in the name of masculinity, if you can create that conversation in young men's minds, you don't have to be there while they have that conversation in their head. Because they will know instantly that when they betray those values, those timeless good values, that it's costing them. Right. That they cannot look in the mirror the same way that next time they do and say you're a good man in quite the same way, because they know they have betrayed that. Now that is a place to start. Another place to start is I think it sounds right to say, just say stop, but I feel like I tell guys all the time, don't do it alone. You can't, you will be that guy if you do it alone. What you need to do is go to other guys who don't look so comfortable either. And privately you say to them, I didn't like what was going down over there. And then the two of you, now you have somebody who has your back. And then I think you're much more likely. So the person who's asking, what do you do about touch a butt day, every day sort of thing, my feeling is you're not the only one who's uncomfortable with this. That's right. There are other people, and you've got to find them, and then together you can act. One person, it can be isolated. Two people and more, you open up a space. And I guarantee you, other people will come flooding into that space because they don't like it either.
Create a new kind of brotherhood. Yes.
Well, I just want to say it's not just about them out there. And it's not about the violence of a stranger to another stranger. It's about us individually. It's about our circle, right? And so it's not even, I think about when you hear something that's homophobic or so it's a sexist joke at the water cooler to confront too, right? Yeah. And so when you hear something homophobic or sexist, I say to people, well, if it was somebody saying a racist slur, we would jump on it. Mm-hmm. We would be offended by that. So it's really about it's not about, so if it's a friend of mine or a family member, it's not about him and her. It's about him and me, that I'm offended by what you've done. Right. It's not about her.
Right. That's right.
It's about me and your space to me. Mm-hmm. So to really look at, we can do things and we can do PSAs and go talk to whoever we want to talk to, but it's also our conversations with our boys, not saying you throw like a girl anymore because girls throw just fine, right? It's not doing any of those things. It's just changing how we talk, how we move in the world, what we do as well.
Can I say something really quickly? We've all been doing this work for a long time, and I think that we're comfortable talking about this, we're comfortable addressing this situation, we're comfortable navigating it, but I don't want to understate the level of fear that men have in addressing each other and confronting another man's sexism or abusive behavior. I will never, ever forget addressing a football team whose name I will not mention, but there was this one guy on the football team. He was an offensive lineman who later went to the NFL. He was about 6'5", 355 pounds, maybe more. And every question that he had was about what happens if the guy turns on him. right? What happened? So you're asking me to confront a guy about his abusive behavior, but then he's going to turn on me. And I'm looking at him like, dude, you're 6'6". You weigh 365 pounds. Who's going to turn on you, man? Right? But in his mind, mind,
he's powerless.
He felt powerless in the situation. That's right. And so that takes me back to the importance of breaking down that fear, of instilling this courage into men. Like, we have to inject, we have to, stick needles into their bodies and like inject courage into men and say, you can do this, you can do it. And I don't want to make fun of the fear, because in many cases the fear is real. Yeah. There can be some really serious ramifications for speaking up and confronting other men. However, we have to be more aware, and we have to teach men that there are a plethora of options that they can choose from in order to challenge it. And the one last thing I want to say really quickly, I'm going to try to be really quick. This Ray Rice situation, right? People are familiar with Ray Rice and the fact that he knocked his fiancée unconscious at I think it was at a casino, okay? I posted something about this on my Facebook page, and I had guy after guy comment on my Facebook page asking questions about what else was Ray Rice supposed to do, right? Because there are rumors that his fiancée spit on him, right? And I had guys sort of projecting all of these wild scenarios of coming up with reasons or rationalizations why he would do such a thing. Well, what if she stole his money? Or what if she had a knife and she was about to stab him, right? Just coming up with all these, making all these crazy, wild, concoctions, these stories about what could have happened to make him snap, right? But nobody talks about Ray Rice having options in that moment, regardless of what she did to piss him off or to anger him, right? We have to give more guys options so that they understand that there's more than one way for me to respond with my anger or with my frustration or with my embarrassment, right? And when we do that, we'll get guys who will walk away from situations as opposed to knocking their fiancé out and dragging them, out of an elevator, right? Yeah. We'll get more guys who will have the confidence and the courage to confront their male peers because they will have the education. And even though we've been doing this for a long time and we've reached a lot of men doing the work that we've done, there are still millions more men who have never had these conversations before. They've never had men talk to them in this way. They've never had guys say with confidence and with strength, say, it's not cool. It's just simply not cool. This is not what makes you a man. This is not what gains my respect from you as a man by acting this way. And I think when men see more men who are standing up and speaking out, they begin to retreat. The guys who are defensive, the guys who are deflecting, the guys who are making these crazy rationalizations and justifications, they start to retreat because they've never had someone confront them before and they realize how problematic what they believe is.
Yeah. Well, and this is an audience of people who want to get there, Byron. I can tell you that because I'm looking at these cards and every one of them is saying, what do I do? I mean, this is an audience of people who don't want to be bystanders, who do want to make a difference, who do want to know what to do. One mother writes, says, okay, so what do I tell my 10-year-old son? What do I tell him to do if he comes on that situation? How do I challenge what everybody else is telling him? Being a boy and a man is all about. What does she do?
I'm sorry, what does she tell him about being a boy in a man's world kind of thing?
No, how does she tell him to respond in a situation where he observes violence?
I see. Well, I would say similar to what Byron said, that to tell an adult nearby, if that's possible, that's what I would recommend him do. I wouldn't necessarily say for a 10-year-old boy to go and intervene, but to tell an adult nearby. and for the other, there was another young boy who there was somebody touching a girl's buttocks.
Touch a butt day or something.
Yeah, and that we were when I've talked to some middle schoolers for a similar thing, they were calling it sexual harassment in the middle school, but it wasn't that. It was these boys. It wasn't quite that, but it was a girl who was touched, and when I touched in her butt, and when I said to those boys, to this whole class of boys, when you walk by the basketball court with your mother and there's men playing basketball, do they say anything to her? Because it's not just about the sister. They don't connect to the sister the same way they connect to the mother. Do they say anything to her? Yes. How does that make you feel? I get angry. I want to protect her. I can't do anything, right? So to really be able to connect that to those boys, to have empathy for that girl, that stayed with me from what you said before.
Right. Yes, Michael, just
No.
quickly. Oh, okay. The questions are all so thoughtful, and what they indicate is that what you have said this evening has had profound effect. People don't want to be bystanders. They don't want to watch it happen. They want to know what to do. They want to change the definitions of what it means to be a man. And thank you so deeply for the work that you are doing to challenge the stereotypes, challenge the media, hold them accountable. And I would just add that on that point, we all have power. I mean, it's that feeling of powerlessness that is so much at the root of all violence, isn't it? And thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you, Paul.
To end our program, I can't think of any more appropriate voice than the co-chair of the Novo Foundation, a man who knows this issue, who supports this issue, whose foundation, along with his wife Jennifer, has been such a force behind the good work that you've heard about this evening. A man who truly, in my opinion, represents what it means to stand up for what you believe. Please welcome to the podium, Peter Buffett.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pat. Incredible panel. It's systemic. I mean, Don really said it very well, and you all did. So systemic, and I am reminded of that phrase, if you ask a fish the most remarkable thing about its environment, it won't say the water. And there's a lot of men fish in this water, and there's a lot of white men fish in this water, and the water is patriarchy. And it really is time to change that. It's necessary, and I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to see it because of conversations like this. To switch metaphors, I don't know who started the engine in the car of patriarchy. But it has been running for a while. People trace it back to various things, but it has been moving faster since probably about 150 years ago. And it keeps moving, and it keeps clamping down on everybody in its path, men and women. And I think a lot of what the men are feeling and not feeling, more specifically, comes out in anger and rage. And I know too many mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers that have felt the rage come from their husbands and significant others. And what I know is that this fast-moving car has hit a massive speed bump. And when it hits a speed bump, when a fast car hits a speed bump, it's violent. It's very, very violent. And we are seeing that in our environment, in our education system, in our health system, everywhere, economic system. There's violence everywhere, but the fundamental driver of it and the fundamental canary in the coal mine of just how bad it is how we treat each other. And the fact that we're having to speak like this about one person's treatment of another is unbelievable. It's not supposed to be this way. I don't think it was always this way at all. I think it's something that's been happening over a relatively short period of time, which is a few thousand years, but it's still relatively short. And it can stop. It's not about slightly putting it, lower on the agenda. It's none of the other problems that we're talking about in terms of climate change and all these various things. None of those things will stop until we start treating each other like humans. So this is it. This is the only real question of the day. Everything else will follow if we start loving each other. And that means we have to start feeling. And when guys are told not to feel when they're 4 years old, that does come out in really dangerous ways for all of us, certainly men included. I have a feeling that this room is mostly the choir. And what you now need to become are preachers, every single one of you. Leave the choir, go out of the church, and start your own parish, and start changing the way everybody that you know thinks about this issue. Because our survival, I believe, literally depends on it. So thank you, guys, and Pat.
I have one final duty, and I'll just pick up on your metaphor, Peter. Before you can become a preacher, you have to save yourself, right?
Yep.
And while we think that all of you already represent the saved, you're certainly here tonight because you want to make a difference. So Sanctuary for Families is going to help us all do that a little bit more. There's a postcard that you were all given. It's sort of like a pledge card. And if you look, it says at the top, I am committed to creating a future where freedom from gender violence is a basic human right. And then it asks you to do two things. To fill in this part which says, in the next 48 hours, I will. What will you do in the next 48 hours to end gender violence? In the next month, I will. And if you fill this out, it becomes your own pledge to yourself. And then that's the message that you take to others. And if you leave these postcards behind, we're going to call you. Or check on you. Or check in some way. Text, Facebook, however we might find you to help along as each and every one of us leaves tonight deciding that gender violence is our issue. And let's stand up and do something about it. Thank you to Sanctuary for Families.
Yeah, me too.